The ring arrived in a paper envelope, no return address, tucked between a gas bill and a takeout menu in the brass mailbox of a restaurant that no longer served dinner. Nadia Voss found it on a Tuesday morning in November, when the sky was the color of wet cement and the streets outside smelled of rain and exhaust, and the particular cold that settles into brick buildings and never entirely leaves. She was wearing her apron already, her keys still looped around 2 fingers, and she almost threw the envelope away without opening it. She almost did a lot of things that month. Instead, she stood in the narrow back hallway of the restaurant her grandmother had left her, next to the mop bucket and the walk-in cooler, and she worked a thumbnail under the flap and let the contents fall into her palm. A ring, silver or white gold, she couldn't tell without looking properly. A single dark stone the color of a bruise in dim light, deep violet black, set flat in a clean modern bezel. No inscription inside the band, no note. Nothing. Her first thought was that it was someone else's mail. Her second was that it was costume jewelry someone had found on the sidewalk and forwarded by accident. Her third thought arrived about 10 seconds later, uninvited, in the form of a memory she had spent 2 years trying to file under Not My Problem, a woman standing at the bar on one of the restaurant's last busy nights, not eating, not drinking, just watching the room with the stillness of something that had learned patience the expensive way. Dark suit. No jewelry except the ring, and then the woman had been gone, and 3 days later so had the ring. Nadia had noticed its absence on the bar top without understanding why she'd noticed. The way you notice when a painting is missing from a wall you never consciously looked at. That was 2 years ago. Nadia set the ring on the shelf above the mop bucket. She told herself she would deal with it later. She told herself this the way she told herself a lot of things, with complete sincerity and no follow-through at all. She was 31 years old, an omega who had presented late and quietly at 24, without the drama the designation typically promised. She ran a restaurant called Mara's, named for her grandmother, not herself, in a neighborhood that was gentrifying in the specific way where the coffee shops got more expensive, but the heating in the apartment buildings never improved. She had 2 full-time line cooks, a part-time server named Bex who was also her best friend, and a lease she could just barely afford if the weekend service held. She did not have a pack, a partner, or suppressants she could consistently afford, which meant she managed her designation the old-fashioned way, black tea, cold showers, and the smell of kitchen heat, which had always been grounding for her in a way she had never tried to explain to anyone. Her savant skill, though she would not have called it that, she would have called it the thing that keeps the lights on, was food cost arithmetic. Not accounting exactly, though she kept the books herself with practiced precision. It was something more granular. She could read a menu, any menu, glance at a produce invoice, walk a walk-in cooler with her eyes, and know within 3% whether a restaurant was going to make it or was already bleeding out. She had been right 100% of the time, which she knew because she had been unofficially consulting for other small restaurants in the neighborhood for 2 years, accepting payment in the form of fish she couldn't source cheaply and a standing tab at the wine shop 2 blocks over. She had saved 4 restaurants. She had also correctly told 3 owners that there was nothing to save, which was a different and harder kind of accuracy. She was not famous for this. She was not famous for anything. That was, until November, still fine with her. She did not think about the ring again until Bex came in at noon and saw it on the shelf and picked it up and held it to the fluorescent light. "That's not a ring you find in a paper envelope," Bex said. Bex had the blunt diagnostic manner of someone who had grown up in a family where honesty was deployed like furniture, heavy, functional, in the way. That's a ring you keep in a case that costs more than my car. Someone mailed it to the restaurant. Someone mailed, Beck stopped, turned the ring once, set it back down. Nadia, this is a black diamond. It's probably glass. It is absolutely not glass. Bex looked at her with the expression she reserved for moments when Nadia was being deliberately obtuse. Have you eaten anything this morning? That's not a question. It genuinely is. Have you? She hadn't. She ate a bowl of rice with pickled cabbage standing at the pass while Bex made the calls she should have been making, and she thought about the ring, and she thought about the woman at the bar with the stillness of a patient thing, and she thought about how certain she had been 2 years ago that the woman's scent. Something like dark amber and cold iron, a pairing that made no immediate sense together and then made complete sense, the way a chord resolves, was the most grounding thing she'd ever caught on the air in her own restaurant, which was saying something, because this restaurant had always smelled like home. She did not connect these facts. She was careful not to. The woman walked in at 6:15, 45 minutes before service, when the door should have been locked. Nadia had forgotten to lock it. She forgot things when she was doing the books. If you are listening and have not yet subscribed to the channel, do that now. Then come back, because this is where it begins. The woman did not knock. She did not announce herself. She simply stood in the doorway of Mara's restaurant in a dark coat that was cut like a command and waited, and Nadia looked up from the invoice spreadsheet, and for a moment, neither of them moved. She was taller than Nadia remembered. Or not taller. Nadia was 5'4". Most people registered as tall, but she took up space differently than other tall people. She stood the way buildings stand, the assumption of permanence built into the posture. Her hair was dark and cut short at the sides, longer on top, tucked behind one ear. Her eyes, when they moved to Nadia's face, were the particular gray of the sky an hour before a storm that is absolutely coming. Her left hand, resting at her side, had no ring on it. You found it, the woman said. This was not a question either. Nadia considered several responses, most of which were variations on you were supposed to call first, or how did you know it ended up here? She said, the shelf above the mop bucket. You're welcome. Something moved in the woman's face, not a smile. A precursor to a smile, the geographical feature a smile would require. May I come in? You're already in. That's true. She stepped inside and closed the door. She was wearing the same unhurried patience Nadia remembered from 2 years ago, settled over her like a second coat, and beneath it, Nadia caught the edge of it as she moved. That scent. Dark amber and cold iron, with something underneath now that the coat had warmed. Wood smoke. The dry kind, old wood burning clean. Her scent signature announced what her clothes and her posture had not yet confirmed to anyone who hadn't already guessed. Alpha. The highest register alpha Nadia had encountered in 11 years of running a restaurant that seated 40 and served the whole neighborhood. I sent the envelope to this address, the woman said, because I lost the ring here. 2 years ago. Your bar. I know. I remember. The precursor to the smile again. You remember. I have a good memory for things that happen in my restaurant. Nadia pulled the ring from her apron pocket. She had moved it there at some point without consciously deciding to, and set it on the nearest table. It's yours. I'm glad it got back to you. The woman looked at the ring for a moment. Then she pulled out a chair and sat down, which was not what Nadia had expected, and folded her hands on the table with the deliberate care of someone who had learned to make their hands very still, and looked at Nadia with the full attention of both storm-gray eyes, and said, I would like to have dinner here, if you'll allow it. We're not open for 40 minutes. I'm aware. I can wait. There was a silence. Outside, a car passed. The kitchen had the particular pre-service hum of everything ready and nothing yet begun, and through it, Nadia could still catch that scent, amber, iron, wood smoke, and her hindbrain was doing something stupid and involuntary that she was going to have a word with it about later. "What's your name?" Nadia said. A pause of approximately 4 seconds, long enough to be noticeable, long enough to be a choice. "Cassiel," the woman said. "Cassiel Varn." Nadia had grown up in this neighborhood. She had spent 11 years running a restaurant in this city. She knew the name Cassiel Varn the way she knew the names of transit lines and hospitals, essential infrastructure, not something you interacted with directly. Cassiel Varn, whose family had controlled the trade routes in and out of the port district for 3 generations, and whose personal control of those routes, since her mother's death 6 years ago, had become absolute and was by all visible metrics expanding. Cassiel Varn, who was referred to in the 3 separate contexts Nadia had ever heard her discussed, by the shipping broker who ate at the bar on Fridays, by Bex's cousin who worked in city planning, and by the restaurant supplier who had once refused to explain a surcharge and then explained it immediately when a name was mentioned, simply as the warden. Not a title, a fact. Nadia said, "I'll set a table." She was aware, pulling the good tablecloth from the linen shelf, that she was not afraid. This bothered her a little. She was a practical person who correctly identified dangerous things. She should have been at least moderately afraid. She was instead aware of a sensation in the center of her chest that was the opposite of afraid, a warmth with a specific weight to it, like the warmth of a kitchen at the beginning of a long service, something that said, "This is the thing you do well. Stay here." She didn't examine it. She set the table. Cassiel Varn ate dinner at Mara's that night the way she occupied space, completely, without visible effort, taking the food seriously in the way that people who eat in very good places rarely bother to anymore. She ordered the lamb because Nadia told her to, and the celery root preparation because it was the thing they did best and she wanted Nadia to know she had heard that, and a glass of the natural red because Nadia held it up and said this one, with a conviction that apparently settled the matter. She ate without performing enjoyment, which was the sincerest form of it. Bex, appearing and disappearing from the pass with the studied casualness of someone absolutely paying attention, caught Nadia's eye once and made an expression that required no words. Nadia ignored it. The restaurant filled around Cassiel Varn, and no one approached her uninvited, which Nadia noticed. You could tell a great deal about a person by the radius they occupied, without doing anything to enforce it. At the end of the meal, Cassiel set a card on the table beside the ring, which she had picked up and pocketed without comment during the soup course, and said, "Your food cost on the lamb is wrong." Nadia had been clearing the adjacent table. She stopped. "You're running it at roughly 38%, Cassiel said. "If you're sourcing from Alderman's and from the cut the dish requires, you can get to 31 with a different butcher relationship." "I know a supplier." Nadia put down the plates she was holding. "How do you know what I'm running?" "You calculated your menu price at the table." "Not overtly. You looked at the dish and adjusted something in your head." A pause. "I noticed that kind of thinking. I've been looking for it." "You've been looking for a restaurant owner who does food cost math at the table." "No," Cassiel picked up the card and held it out. "I've been looking for someone who sees the number everyone else is misreading and knows what it means. In particular, I have 6 establishments with accounting that does not align with what I know the revenues should be. I believe someone is taking money and covering it well enough that 3 separate auditors have missed it. The card was ivory, heavy stock, nothing on it but a phone number. Nadia did not take it. I run a restaurant." "You run a restaurant and you consult for 4 others within 6 blocks of this one, and you have been right every time." Cassiel's voice was entirely level. I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. I'm asking you to look at numbers. It's what you do anyway. I would like to pay you for it properly. Why me? Because you returned the ring. Nadia waited. That couldn't be the full answer. Most people, Cassiel said, would have kept it, or sold it, or researched who it belonged to and used the information. You put it on a shelf above a mop bucket and waited. She stood. She was not much taller standing than she had seemed sitting, but the quality of the space around her changed. That's the only credential I was checking. She left before Nadia could answer. The card stayed on the table. Nadia picked it up. 3 weeks later, she walked into the building that housed the headquarters of Varn Group, carrying a laptop bag that had seen better decades and wearing the coat she wore to weddings and important meetings, which were the same coat. The lobby was 30 feet of pale marble and the specific kind of silence that money installs. She gave her name to the desk, and a woman with the quiet efficiency of someone trusted with information appeared and took her upstairs to a conference room with a window that showed the full arc of the harbor gray-green in the December light. The cargo routes running out in lines she could trace from here. The numbers they gave her were in 6 binders. She opened the first one. By the end of the second hour she had found it, a cascade of small transposition errors that were too consistent to be accidental, migrating costs between accounts in a pattern that required someone with access to both the supplier records and the internal billing codes. Not loud, not stupid. Patient, like something that had been running for long enough that it had started to feel like weather, she told Cassiel. Cassiel listened without moving. She had the quality, Nadia was beginning to understand, of an excellent listener. She did not telegraph where she was going. She did not telegraph that she had already arrived. She simply received the information and did something with it internally that you could not see and would not be shown until she chose. His name, Cassiel said. I'd need another week to be certain. A week, Cassiel said. All right. It took Nadia 4 days. His name was Denton Marsh, the VP of Accounts, who had worked for the Varn family for 9 years and had, she found in the subsidiary records, a private business registered 2 years ago in a name that was not quite his name, receiving payments that were not quite coincidental. She gave the full report to Cassiel on a Friday morning, 41 pages, and watched Cassiel read it at the conference table with the harbor behind her in winter light, gray and enormous. When Cassiel finished reading, she closed the report and said, I owe you an apology. Nadia had not expected that. For what? For the scale. I told you it was 6 establishments. It's 11. The binders I gave you in the first meeting were a test. She looked at Nadia with the direct attention of those storm gray eyes. You passed it in the first 2 hours. A silence. That's an unusual way to hire someone, Nadia said. I have an unusual amount to lose if I hire wrong. A pause. The work I actually need is more than accounting. I need someone who can read an operation the way you read a menu, who walks in and knows within 3% whether it's going to hold or whether it's already failing, and can find the mechanism. For 4 of the 11 situations, I believe the mechanism is Marsh. For the others, I don't know yet. I need to know. I still run a restaurant. I know, not a dismissal. A fact, offered back exactly as she'd given it. And I don't have a background in, you have the background in what actually matters. Cassiel stood, moved to the window, put her hands in her pockets, and looked at the harbor. The winter light put the pale scar of something along her jaw that Nadia hadn't noticed before. My mother used to say that auditors find what they look for. You find what's there. That's rarer. A beat. I'll pay what your restaurant makes in a month, per week, until the situation is resolved. After that, if you want the work, we discuss terms. If you want to go back to Mara's, there are no conditions. Nadia looked at the back of her head, at the short-cut dark hair and the set of the shoulders and the practiced stillness. She caught that scent again. Amber, iron, the clean wood smoke underneath, and felt the warmth in her chest that she had been not examining for 3 weeks. "The restaurant still operates," she said. "Of course. I set my own hours. Within reason, I'll need access to all the original supplier contracts, not the summaries." Cassiel turned. The precursor to a smile. "They'll be on your desk Monday." She had a desk. This happened fast enough that she didn't entirely process it until she was sitting at it on Monday morning in an office 2 floors below Cassiel's, with the harbor visible at an angle through a narrow window and the original supplier contracts in a stack that reached her eye level. The woman who'd brought her the contracts, Sabel, the second in command, Beta, with the clipped manner of someone who had made peace with competence as a solitary condition, and the watchful eyes of someone still not entirely at peace with Nadia's presence in this building, set the stack down and said, "She doesn't give people desks, I gathered." "In 11 years, she has given 2 people desks. Where are they now?" "One retired. One is me." Sabel studied her. She also doesn't apologize. She apologized to me on Friday. A silence. "I know," Sabel said, in a tone that meant, "I know, and I have been thinking about it since Friday, and I have not yet finished." She left without further comment. Nadia found the second mechanism by the end of the week, the third by the following Tuesday. The fourth was elegant enough that she almost admired it, a supplier agreement running through a shell that was technically legitimate, paying for services rendered to a company that existed only as a filing. She found it because the inventory receipts were slightly too clean, the kind of clean that meant someone was checking them, which meant someone had reason to. She told Cassiel. Cassiel listened. She had a way of listening to Nadia specifically that Nadia had begun to notice, an increment of stillness, a quality of attention that was different from the attention she gave to Sabel, or to the lawyers, or to anyone else Nadia had seen her with. The storm-gray eyes, when they were on Nadia, had something in them that was almost careful, in the sense of careful as a way of handling something you don't want to damage. Nadia did not examine this either. She was running out of things she wasn't examining. The holiday closed the harbor routes for 2 days, and Cassiel invited her, with the formal courtesy she extended to everything, to the company dinner, which was held in a private room of a restaurant 3 times the size and price of Mara's. Nadia wore the wedding coat. She sat at the table to Cassiel's right, which she understood afterward to be a position with meaning in this particular room, and ate food that was technically better than what she served, and felt no complicated feelings about this, because she knew exactly why it was better and could have corrected for it with a different fish supplier. Cassiel, at some point in the second hour, said quietly, for her ears only, "The lamb is better at Mara's." "Of course it is," Nadia said. "I won't tell them." The almost smile, not the precursor, the actual thing, brief, private, offered sideways. Nadia registered it somewhere in her chest and filed it aggressively away. On the 12th of December, at a few minutes past 2 in the morning, Nadia's phone rang. She was awake. She was always awake at 2. It was a restaurant owner's curse, the hour when the brain decided to review everything that had gone wrong, or might go wrong, or was probably going wrong without her knowledge. And she answered without looking at the screen. "There's a problem," Cassiel said. Her voice was different. Not different as in fractured, not audibly alarmed. Nadia suspected Cassiel's voice under genuine alarm would be very quiet and very flat and impossible to distinguish from her normal voice without the context of the rest of her. Different in that the formality was gone, like the coat being set down. "What kind?" Nadia said, sitting up. "Marsh has moved money, faster than I expected. He's covered something I needed intact." A pause. "He knows we're looking. How? That's the question." The quiet was different from her daytime quiet, more tired. "I need to know if there's a secondary mechanism I haven't identified. If he knew quickly enough, he knew in a way that required someone inside." Nadia was already opening her laptop. "Send me the timeline." "It's 2 a.m. "You called at 2 a.m. A silence that lasted several seconds. In it, through the phone, she heard something that took her a moment to identify. Cassiel exhaling. Not a sigh, the particular release of someone who has been holding something and just, by accident, set it down. "The timeline will be in your inbox in 10 minutes, Cassiel said. "I'll call you when I have something." She found it in 3 hours, which was faster than she would have expected and slower than she would have liked, a separate filing, 10 months old, a consultant arrangement that was not in the binders she'd been given. Paying a name she didn't recognize for services that were not specified. The name, when she cross-referenced it against the internal directories Cassiel had eventually given her full access to, matched a listed contact for the company's communications director. An internal contact, someone who'd had access to the conference room schedule. She called Cassiel at 5:20. "Harriet Lowe," she said. "Communications director. The arrangement has been running for 10 months, which means she knew before I arrived. She would have told Marsh that someone was reviewing the accounts the moment the first binder left this building." Another silence. She heard the quality of it change. "She was my mother's hire," Cassiel said. "I know, it's in the tenure records. I'm sorry." A very long beat of silence. Then, "Thank you." Low, direct, with something in it that was not quite what Nadia was used to hearing from her, not the formal courtesy, not the deliberate calm, something older than those things. "Try to sleep," Nadia said. "You have lawyers for the next part. I know what I have lawyers for." But there was no edge in it. "Get some sleep yourself." She did. She woke at 10 to snow, which didn't happen often this far south, and the particular muffled quiet of a city under 4 inches of white, and the feeling of something having shifted in the night in a way she hadn't been asked to authorize. The snow didn't stop. By noon, the city was making its slow adjustment to disruption, canceled deliveries, empty streets, the few people still out walking with the deliberate pleasure of the inconvenienced. Nadia walked to Mara's anyway, because she always walked to Mara's. Bex was already there, having apparently walked from even farther, which Nadia chose to interpret as loyalty rather than stubbornness, though with Bex these were historically the same thing. "Varn called the restaurant," Bex said. Nadia stopped taking her coat off. "Cassiel Varn called the restaurant. Left a message. Said the supplier she'd mentioned, the lamb contact, would be reaching out this week. Said tell you the terms are already arranged." Bex was looking at her with an expression of elaborate neutrality. She also said, and I'm quoting, "The celery root preparation is better than anything we served at the company dinner. If she has time to add it to the menu permanently, she should." That's a very specific message. It is an extremely specific message. Bex poured coffee and set it in front of her. She called the restaurant Nadia. The woman who controls half the port called a 40-seat neighborhood restaurant on a snowed in Tuesday to pass along a wine recommendation about celery root. Lamb contact. And it wasn't a wine recommendation. You know what I mean. Nadia drank the coffee. Outside, the snow was still coming down in the slow, steady way that meant it wasn't planning to stop. She remembers things, Nadia said. I can see that. A pause. The question is what you're going to do about it. She didn't answer. She did add the celery root to the permanent menu that week. 3 days after the snow, Cassiel came to Mara's again. Unannounced, at 6 in the evening, when the restaurant was just filling, and she sat at the bar this time instead of a table, which was different. The bar at Mara's was close quarters, the counter was old wood, worn to a shine, and the shelf behind it was the original shelving her grandmother had installed, and the stools were mismatched in the way of a place that had been around long enough for the original furniture to become character. Cassiel sat with the same composed stillness she brought everywhere and ate the celery root preparation and did not perform enjoyment. And at some point in the middle of service, around 7:30, when the noise level had risen and Bex had disappeared into the back, and the seat to Cassiel's left was occupied by a regular who was politely ignoring everyone, Cassiel said, without preamble, my mother's ring. Nadia, pouring a glass at the other end of the bar, looked up. She gave it to me the week before she died. She said she'd had it made for a reason I wouldn't understand until I did. A pause. I lost it here 2 years ago. I noticed it was gone on the way home, but didn't come back. I didn't. I wasn't ready to go looking for it. Nadia came back down the bar. Why are you telling me this? The storm gray eyes on her, the careful quality. Because you returned it without investigating who it belonged to. And because, a pause that was uncharacteristic in its visible weight. Because I've been trying to understand why I came back in person to retrieve it when I could have sent someone, and I think the honest answer is that I wanted to know what you were like. And you calculate food cost at the table, and you argue with me about wine, and you call me at 5 in the morning and you say, try to sleep, and you put an inherited ring on a shelf above a mop bucket because you didn't know where else to put it. She set her glass down with a deliberate care that Nadia was starting to understand as one of her specific gestures, the one that meant the next thing she said mattered. My mother said the ring would find the right person. I spent 6 years finding that contemptible. And now I'm sitting at your grandmother's bar in the middle of a snowstorm eating the best celery root I've had in my adult life, so the almost smile. The actual one. I'm in the process of revising. Heat rose in the restaurant the way it always did by 7:30, the combined warmth of the kitchen and the room and the people, and in it Nadia could catch that scent, amber, iron, wood smoke, closer than usual. The bar doing what bars do, collapsing the usual distances. She felt the warmth in her chest that had been accumulating for 3 weeks without permission, and she was out of arguments for why she shouldn't examine it. I have to get back to service, she said. I know, but you could come back on a night you're not here on business. The pause. The 4-second pause that meant a choice being made. Yes, Cassiel said. I could. She came back the following Saturday and the one after that. She came back on an unremarkable Wednesday evening when neither of them had planned it, which Nadia only knew because she looked up from the pass at 8 o'clock, and Cassiel was at the bar, coat still on, looking at the specials board with the focused attention she brought to everything she decided to look at. They had dinner after service in the empty restaurant, Nadia cooking for 2 at the pass with the controlled ease of someone whose body knew this space completely. Cassiel eating at the bar with the coat finally off, and actually talking, with the formality down. Not replaced by casualness exactly, by something more honest than both. Cassiel talked about her mother carefully, The way you talk about someone you've been working on grieving, about a woman who had run a difficult empire with the firm conviction that the empire was a tool and the people were the point, and about how Cassiel had inherited the empire and not yet entirely figured out how to inherit the conviction. About loneliness as a structural feature of the position, how the room cleared a specific way when she entered, and how she had come to mistake the clearing room for proof that she didn't need the room. Nadia talked about her grandmother, who had built Mara's from a lunch counter and had died believing the neighborhood would be fine and had been right about the neighborhood and wrong about almost everything else. About presenting late and quietly and finding that the designation neither ruined her life nor explained it, which she had always suspected and been correct about. About the number of times she had walked into a failing restaurant and known it in the first 30 seconds, and the specific weight of that knowledge, how it never got easier to carry. Cassiel listened to all of it. She remembered it. Nadia could tell she remembered it the way she could tell anything, by the small evidence that accumulated, a question 2 weeks later that referenced something Nadia had said in passing, a reference to the lunch counter in a context that meant she had been thinking about it. The claiming was nothing like Nadia had expected, which was that it wouldn't be like anything, because it wasn't going to happen. It didn't happen all at once. It happened the way winter does, gradually and then completely, and then you're in it and you can't see back to where it began. It began, if you had to locate the beginning, on the night Cassiel came in late and Nadia could smell before she opened the bar door that something was wrong. The scent had changed, the amber was still there, but the cold iron was sharpened to something closer to rust, and the wood smoke was acrid, the stressed variant, the kind of scent that said, "Something is happening that I am not handling." "Sit down," Nadia said. Cassiel sat down. This, in retrospect, told Nadia something. She brought tea she didn't normally serve and put it in front of her and didn't ask anything and waited. And after a while, Cassiel said, "My father called today." Nadia knew what the Varn family history was well enough. She didn't say, "I know." She said, "Was it bad?" "He wanted to know if I was going to sell the Eastern contracts. He's been waiting 6 years for me to fail at this." A pause. "He told my mother, the week she died, that no alpha woman had ever built something like this without a controlling partner, and that he would be here when she was done trying." She held the tea mug. Her hands, Nadia noticed, were slightly less still than usual. She wasn't done trying. She was dead. "And he's saying the same thing to you now. He says it differently. More elegantly. Does that make it better?" "No," the hint of dry. "No, it makes it worse." Nadia sat down on the other side of the bar, which put her lower than Cassiel's eye level, which was wrong, so she climbed up on the counter, undignified and immediate, and sat on the bar itself, feet dangling, which was extremely against health code, and also the only way to be at the right height for this conversation. Cassiel looked at her for a moment. "You're sitting on the bar." "I'm sitting on the bar." "Isn't that against regulation?" "Yes, I'll report myself in the morning." She picked up her own mug. "Your father is wrong." "I know. Not in a general sense. Specifically, empirically wrong. I have looked at the financials for the Varn Group with a level of detail that most of your own people haven't, and what I can tell you is that the operation your mother built and the decisions you've made since are not the decisions of someone who needs a controlling partner. They're the decisions of someone who knows exactly what she's doing and is terrified she doesn't. A silence. "That's a very precise thing to say," Cassiel said. "I told you, I find what's there." The storm gray eyes, the careful quality. And then, slowly, Cassiel's hands around the mug went still again. The real stillness, not the controlled kind, the kind that comes from something actually settling. "Thank you," she said. "The same low register as 5 in the morning." The real one. They sat in the empty restaurant while the street outside went quiet with the specific quiet of a city after midnight, and at some point the mug was on the counter, and Cassiel's hand was on the counter next to it, and Nadia's hand was near Cassiel's hand in the way that happens when no one is making a decision, but a decision is being made. And Cassiel said, very quietly, "Tell me what you want." Nadia looked at their hands. At the bar top her grandmother had worn smooth. At the ring on Cassiel's hand now, the dark stone, the violet black, catching the low light. "I don't do things I'm not sure of," she said. "I know. And I'm not." She stopped. The thing in her chest, the warmth that had been accumulating since November, patient and constant, without permission. "I'm not sure about a lot of things. Name one thing you are sure of." A pause. "That scent," Nadia said. "Yours, amber and iron and something underneath. I've been sure about that since the first night." Cassiel turned her hand. Not a grip. An offering. "Then start there," she said. Nadia put her hand in Cassiel's. What followed was not all at once. It was slow and deliberate and full of the particular awareness of two people who understand that this is not a thing you rush, who have both spent too long in the company of bad speed to trust it. The winter turned. The restaurant continued. Sable's expression when Nadia arrived at the Varn Group building on the Monday after New Year's had shifted by approximately 15 degrees from hostile assessment towards something she could not quite categorize, which Nadia decided to classify as provisional. The legal situation resolved. Marsh was arrested in February, the charges filed with the kind of thorough documentation that forecloses appeal. Harriet Lowe left the company ahead of it, which was offered as the alternative to the same documentation being applied to her. She took it. Cassiel did not ask Nadia's opinion on this arrangement, but told her about it and watched her face, and when Nadia said, "I think that was the right call," there was a quality to Cassiel's stillness in the next moment that suggested she had been waiting for that answer, without knowing she was waiting. Denton Marsh, at sentencing, was represented by lawyers paid for by funds he no longer had access to, which Nadia's documentation had ensured, and was sentenced to 7 years with a financial judgment that attached to his private business, his personal accounts, and the consulting arrangement that had funded the arrangement. The judge read out the specific charges with the tone of someone who had not expected the evidence to be quite this complete. Nadia was not in the courtroom. She was at Mara's, running service. Bex texted her the verdict at 6:45, between the soup and the fish, and she read it between the pass and the linen shelf and did not feel triumphant. She felt correct, the specific weight of a number that comes out right. Cassiel arrived at 8. She did not explain why she had come to the restaurant instead of anywhere else, which was explanation enough. The heat arrived in March, which was early, and handled between them the way the rest of the winter had been, with conversation about it, with a directness that required both of them to be braver than their habits, with Cassiel's very particular restraint under what Nadia understood to be considerable instinct pressure, the alpha's architecture working against itself. She said, the first night of it, "Tell me what you want. Tell me to stop, and I will, at any point. No consequence, no adjustment. I will simply stop." "I know," Nadia said. "I want you to know it in the moment, not just in principle." Cassiel, she put her hand against her jaw, where the scar was. "I know." The warmth between them was not wild. It was not what Nadia had ever been told heat was, in the abstract, the freight train rhetoric. It was more like the kitchen at the beginning of a long service, something that said, "This is the thing you do well, stay here." with the specificity of Cassiel's hands and the amber iron scent and the way the small room smelled like both of them, warm and layered, dark amber and her own orange blossom and clean cotton, with something underneath that she had never identified until now, something that smelled, absurdly, like home. The claiming came after spring did, on a Saturday evening when the restaurant was closed and the windows were open for the first time since October, and the air came in carrying the specific green smell of a city in early warmth, Cassiel asked, with the direct language of a woman who had been practicing directness all winter, "Will you?" And Nadia said, with the directness of a woman who had spent the same winter checking her certainty and finding it solid, "Yes." The bond snap was the thing the books never described accurately. Not a breaking. A settling, like a number coming out right, like a chord resolving, like the specific warmth of a kitchen at the start of a long service, the sensation of something that had been slightly misaligned making its final adjustment. Cassiel's scent deepened in the moment of it, the wood smoke resolving into something richer, cedar under the old wood, and the amber ran warm instead of cool. And Nadia thought, absurdly, of the ring on a shelf above a mop bucket, waiting for whoever it was supposed to wait for. She understood what Cassiel's mother had meant. Cassiel stopped when Nadia indicated, precisely at the Mercy ceiling. This was not a surprise. It was, Nadia thought, the whole thesis, a person who could stop, a person who had chosen to learn stopping as the discipline, the practice, the ongoing work. Restraint not as limitation, but as the thing that made choice mean something. What she said, after, with her head against Nadia's shoulder and the spring air coming through the window and the restaurant dark and quiet around them, was, "My mother was right." About the ring. About everything. A pause. She said I would know, that the right person would be obvious in retrospect and invisible before. Invisible, Nadia said. I don't mean unseen. She tilted her head. The storm gray eyes, at close range, had a quality she had only started showing in the last few months, warm underneath the gray, like the sky after the storm has passed. I mean, there before I knew to look. The summer was good, the long kind, the kind that earns the word. Mara's was full most weekends, and Bex hired a second server whose name was Corvin, and who was irretrievably cheerful in a way that should have been grating, and wasn't. The lamb supplier Cassiel had arranged produced a margin improvement that Nadia calculated, with satisfaction, to be exactly what she'd told Cassiel it would be, 22% over 18 months, which she had told Cassiel in the first week, sitting in the conference room with the harbor at her back. You told me that in December, Cassiel said. You said all right and waited 4 months to check. I trusted you. I know. I'm pointing out that I was right. You're always right. I know that too. The precursor to the smile. The real thing. She had stopped being surprised by it, which was its own kind of surprise, that she had come to know Cassiel's face well enough that the smile felt like something she recognized, something that belonged to the landscape. Sable came to dinner at Mara's in August, which she had apparently been intending to do since spring, and had been unable to do until she decided it was not a capitulation. She ate the celery root with the focused attention of someone evaluating evidence and said, at the end of the meal, to Nadia, I've worked for Cassiel Varn for 11 years. I have watched her walk into rooms and watched every room adjust. I have never watched her be the one who adjusts. A pause. She adjusts for you. She doesn't do it the way people do it when they're performing. She does it because you're actually there. Nadia looked at her across the bar. In 11 years, Sable said, I have never once seen her waiting for anyone. She finished the wine. She was waiting at the bar the night of the company dinner before you arrived. 20 minutes. She picked up her coat. I thought you should know. She left. Nadia stood behind the bar for a moment and looked at the restaurant her grandmother had built, at the worn wood counter and the original shelving, and the window where the summer evening was coming in soft and warm, and felt something she had not expected to feel. Complete. Not finished. Not closed. Complete, the way a number that comes out right is complete, still open to revision, still in motion, but holding. The proposal happened in September on a Sunday morning, which was the day Mara's was closed and Cassiel had begun arriving early, with coffee from the place on the next block, and sitting in the kitchen while Nadia did the week's books. It was a domestic arrangement that had arrived without fanfare, one of the many small migrations of the summer, and Nadia had not remarked on it, because it fit the kitchen, and the kitchen had accepted it. Cassiel set the coffee on the counter. She sat down. She reached into the pocket of the jacket she was wearing, the soft gray one, the one that had become her Mara's jacket, in the way that objects become specific to places they've been enough times. The box was small, matte black, no logo. She set it on the counter between them. She did not open it. She did not kneel. She was Cassiel Varn, and she proposed the way she occupied space, from her full height, with the particular formality that was just her and not performance, and she said, I would like to spend the rest of my life in this kitchen on Sunday mornings. I understand there are conditions. Nadia looked at the box. No controlling partners, she said. None. Yours is the only analysis I trust, which creates an uncomfortable structural dependency, but I've decided to accept it. The restaurant stays. The restaurant is what I'm proposing to. You come with it. Nadia opened the box. The ring inside was not the violet black diamond. It was a simple thing, warm gold, set with 2 small stones, one dark amber and one pale orange, pressed together. She did not need to ask what they were. She knew what her own scent was. She knew what Cassiel's was. She looked up. The storm gray eyes, with the warmth underneath. Yes, she said. Obviously yes. The wedding was in December, 1 year after the snow. They held it in the restaurant, which seated 40 and contained, on the day, 62 people by Nadia's count, which she calculated without trying, and which later became part of the story, that even at her own wedding she had been running the numbers, and that this was, Cassiel said in the vows, one of the 12 specific things she loved about her, listed aloud in front of 62 people with the same careful attention to detail that had identified Denton Marshes. Transpositions in 2 hours, except applied to a different ledger entirely. Nadia cried at the vows, which she had not expected, and which Bex had absolutely expected and had brought tissues for, having prepared for most contingencies. Sable stood at the front of the room with the expression of someone who had followed a difficult person through 11 years of difficult rooms, and who was, for the first time in those 11 years, not managing anything, just watching. She made a small sound, once near the vows, that she would later deny. The claiming mark was old and healed by then, a thin scar at the join of neck and shoulder, barely visible unless you knew where to look. The bond was old too, 6 months old, settled and quiet, the particular background hum of someone else's presence that had become, improbably and completely, a kind of silence. The right kind. The last of it happened the way the beginning had, in November. A year on from the paper envelope, 2 years on from the woman at the bar who had lost a ring. They were at Mara's on a Tuesday evening after close. Cassiel at the bar with the coat off and the soft gray jacket on. Nadia doing the week's books at the pass, with half her attention on the numbers and half on the way Cassiel turned a wine glass slowly by the stem, which was a gesture she had learned was thinking. "What?" Nadia said, without looking up. "How did you know? You're doing the glass thing." She totaled the column. "Correct, within 3%, as always." "What are you thinking about? Whether your grandmother knew what she was building?" Cassiel set the glass down. Whether she knew the restaurant would become this. Nadia thought about her grandmother, who had built a lunch counter into a 40-seat restaurant in a neighborhood that was changing, and who had died believing the neighborhood would be fine. Who had a particular way of looking at the room when it was full, a satisfaction that was not pride exactly, more like recognition. The look of someone watching something go right. "I think she knew the lunch counter would last," Nadia said. "I don't think she knew the rest. The rest being all of it." She looked up. Cassiel at the bar, in the soft gray jacket, with the amber iris ring on her hand and the bond quiet in the background between them and the December evening coming in through the gap in the door someone had left. "I think she knew the room would hold." Cassiel looked at her the way she sometimes looked at her, with the full attention of those eyes, careful and warm, and without the glass between them that used to be there. "It does," she said. They found out about the baby in February, which came as a surprise to both of them, though less of a surprise than Nadia would have expected, and which Bex received as confirmation of something she had apparently already decided. The baby arrived in October, small and absolutely certain of her opinions from approximately the second day, and was named for Cassiel's mother, which was Nadia's suggestion, offered quietly in the hospital room while the city was doing its October thing outside the window, and Cassiel was sitting in the way she sat when she was trying not to show that she was moved, very still, very deliberate, and completely transparent to anyone who knew what to look for. She held the baby and said, "She has your expression." "Which one?" "The one that means you've already run the numbers and you know how it comes out. She's 12 hours old." "I know, the warmth underneath the gray." "I'm right, though. The tormentors, the word Nadia would later use for them in retrospect, not in the moment, were not dramatic. They were the ordinary variety. Harriet Lowe, who had cost the restaurant 2 supply relationships and cost Cassiel a grief she had not expected to feel about a betrayal from her mother's employee. The father who had called in December to suggest failure, Denton Marsh, convicted and sentenced and the subject of a financial judgment that was, Nadia had calculated, going to take him 11 years to discharge at current rates. Harriet Lowe, as it happened, did not land easily elsewhere. Her reference letters from the Varn Group were factual and thorough, which was a form of documentation Cassiel had explained in the same tone she used to discuss supplier contracts. She was not ruined, exactly. She was accurately described, which for someone in her position amounted to the same thing. The father called again in August, the August after the wedding, after he had apparently read about the Varn Group's Eastern contract expansion in a financial publication. He said, as Cassiel relayed it to Nadia later, with a brevity that suggested she had already processed most of her feelings about it, that he had underestimated her. This was not an apology. Cassiel had replied, with the formality she reserved for people she was done with, that she knew and had ended the call. What she did not tell him, what she told Nadia instead. On a Tuesday morning with the coffee from the place on the next block and the books spread between them, was that she had transferred his shareholding in the family trust to a conservation foundation her mother had favored, which had been within her power to do for 3 years, and which she had simply been waiting until she was ready. "You didn't need to wait," Nadia said. "I know. I wanted to be the version of myself that did it without anger." She looked at the numbers between them. "I think I am now." Nadia was sure she was right. In the 3rd spring, the spring when the baby was 5 months old, and beginning to develop opinions about cheese, which she would steal directly from Cassiel's plate with an expression of complete justification, Sable came to dinner again. She came on a Sunday this time, which was new, and brought, to everyone's surprise, including her own visible surprise, a person she described as her partner with the careful diction of someone saying a new word correctly. The person was soft-spoken and worked in landscape architecture and called Nadia's celery root preparation the best thing he'd eaten since his grandmother made his birthday dinner when he was 9, which was the kind of specific compliment Nadia trusted. Sable watched Nadia receive this compliment and watched Cassiel watch Nadia receive it, and said, at the end of the evening, to Cassiel specifically, in a voice Nadia was not supposed to hear but did, "You waited 20 minutes at the bar." "I know," Cassiel said. "Worth it. I know that too." The ring sat in its case in the drawer of the nightstand at the apartment they had moved into the winter after the wedding, the apartment with the view of the harbor and the kitchen that was too small by the standards of anyone who didn't already have a professional kitchen 5 minutes away. Cassiel's mother's ring. The violet-black diamond. Nadia sometimes opened the drawer and looked at it in the way she looked at things she was sure about, without needing to verify them, just maintaining awareness of their presence. The ring that had arrived in a paper envelope between a gas bill and a takeout menu, found by a woman in an apron with her keys still looped around 2 fingers, on a Tuesday in November, when the sky was the color of wet cement. She had almost thrown the envelope away. She had almost done a lot of things. On the 2nd November anniversary of the envelope, they ate at Mara's, the 3 of them, which meant the baby in her seat expressing firm opinions about the lamb preparation, and Cassiel at the bar with the soft gray jacket, and Nadia in her apron on the other side of the counter, and the restaurant around them doing what it had always done. Receiving people, holding them, sending them back out into the city with something that was not quite nourishment and not quite warmth, but was both and more. The thing her grandmother had understood before Nadia had words for it. You could be invisible for years. You could be the person who gets it right and never gets the credit, who carries the accurate number and watches other people misread it, who knows how the thing is going to turn out before anyone else is willing to look. You could be defective by the measure of people who are measuring wrong. And then, one night, in a restaurant your grandmother built, a woman in a dark coat could sit at the bar and say your name, your actual name, the one you answer to, not the designation, not the diminutive, and the room could, quietly and without fanfare, reorder itself. Not around her. Not around the power she carried. Around the fact of being seen, finally, by exactly the right set of eyes. That is not a fairy tale. That is a number coming out right. The difference is that numbers are true. The end. If this story found its way to you, if you stayed through the snow and the ring and the bar and all of it, then you already know what it is to wait for a story that sees the thing everyone else keeps looking past. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, when Cassiel listed the 12 specific things she loved about Nadia aloud at the wedding, what do you think the other 11 were? I genuinely want to know. There is a new story coming, and it begins in a place as quiet as this one and lands somewhere you won't see coming. I'll see you there.